Hello, and welcome again back to the newest edition of the A New Leviathan podcast. And today, I'm here to discuss a issue that has come up in recent years, particularly with President Biden's multiple attempts to repeatedly promote bills regarding this subject. And that subject, of course, is the subject of student loan forgiveness. Multiple times, President Biden has proposed bills that would either partially or completely eliminate the student loan money owned by many Americans that they have for the student loans that they have taken out for their education at university or college. Additionally, the Supreme Court has rejected Biden's attempts to impose these laws multiple times and has pointed out that they believe that they are indeed unconstitutional. Regardless of this, Biden insists upon continuing to still promote and still pass them. One issue in particular that has come up with regards to this is their claim that if these student loan forgiveness is indeed passed, it would be a great benefit to the many millions of Americans who have this money that they still owe for these loans. But I believe that when we truly look at the reasoning and the effects that this loan forgiveness plan would have on America and on the people both who have already repaid their student loans and the people who still owe them, I believe we can discover that their claims of benefits are, without a doubt, in no way just. To start out with a very basic claim of why, in particular, student loan debt is targeted more than any other kind of debt. This is a question that a lot of people might ask. Plenty of people owe debt for many types of loans, whether that just be standard loans or car loans or any other type of loan. Why specifically is student loan debt the main type of loan that the Democrats desire to engage a forgiveness plan in and just let millions of people get away with having never actually paid their loan money back? Well, they claim that it's simply because more people owe larger amounts of student loan debt than other types of loan debt, or that it's in some way different. But I believe the reasoning of why they're doing this, especially with Biden's attempts to repeatedly do this near an election year, is very simple. The reason that they target student loan debt in particular is an attempt and a ploy to gain the youth vote. Most people who have this amount of student loan debt are either going to be at a younger age themselves, where they haven't paid this back yet, are members of a newer generation, such as the millennials or Gen Z, who are known to be more liberal and have much lower views of the importance of being completely financially independent without governmental assistance or welfare, but also because the issue of student loan debt and the issue of gaining debt through student loans appears more realistic and appears to be a higher concern for people who are younger, who may either be in college or may not have even gone to college yet, a future generation of voters. This ploy to gain their votes in exchange for giving them the benefit of letting them simply get away with not paying back loans they owe is very simply seen, in my opinion. The Democratic Party and liberal movements in general already get a very large percentage of their support from younger people, whereas the Republican Party and other conservative movements tend to gain much less of their support from younger people. I believe that this is very simply an attempt to double down on this base that the Democrats already perform so well with and encourage a new generation of youth to vote liberally. But not only do they encourage them to vote liberally on this issue, I believe this issue is one of the most important yet one of the most dangerous proposals from the Democratic Party and the liberal movement as a whole, in the way in which it will be not only moving our country towards a socialistic system where the value of each individual being actually responsible for debt they took out is removed, and the idea that some people should pay for things that they do not even benefit from for other people's sake, but also that it will be teaching and promoting to an entire generation to think liberally and to lose the value that if you owe money, you are responsible for paying it back. And we could fully see that the Democrats frequently call the metaphor of the slippery slope that is often used a complete fallacy and say, well, that's not really true. That's a fallacy. You don't know that that's going to happen. But I believe that we can see time and time again that if given a little bit of ground, the Democratic Party has continued to become increasingly more and more liberal throughout their time in power over the past 50 years or so. Back in the 1970s, for example, when the very first Supreme Court decision regarding abortion, that was Roe v. Wade, was passed, the Democratic Party's official party platform was actually that it should be left up to the states, and that they believed that Roe v. Wade was not exactly the best decision. That was actually something the Democratic Party thought back in 1972 off of their official Democratic Party platform. Now we can see that in 2023, the Republican Party has proposed the very same thing that the Democrats were proposing in the 1970s and are now being called radically far right for it. That is the idea that this issue should be primarily, and it is currently, left up to each state to make their own laws. Another example of this would, without a doubt, be the LGBT movement. In the 1990s, President Bill Clinton, who was indeed a Democrat and seen as liberal for his time, proposed the don't ask, don't tell policy regarding the military, which was seen as moderate and compromising. And in that bill, he stated that people who might be gay could serve in the military, they just could not disclose or reveal that they were. And many saw this as a reasonable and moderate compromise. Interestingly enough, it was another Democratic president in 2010, Barack Obama, who repealed this law. After that, we've seen the left then go from a position where they sort of have assured people that even if these rights are enacted, it won't threaten the rights of people such as those who own bakeries or other businesses who are opposed to these values on a religious or Christian ground, that they would never have those rights threatened. The two could coexist. Yet now, in 2021, we saw when Ron DeSantis in Florida tried to pass a bill banning only kindergarten through third graders. After that, he said that it could be allowed in some type of what he defined as age-appropriate form, simply said that no discussion, good or bad, of the LGBT political issues should be given to children who are third grade or lower in Florida's public schools. We saw an outcry from the left who said that it absolutely should be allowed, and that simply that Ron DeSantis' bill was far right, radical, dangerous, and that children should be allowed to be exposed to left-wing concepts in schools, and it doesn't matter what the parents should think. Time and time again, we see this pattern. The left wing will continue to only get more and more radical and more leftist if they are given an inch of ground on any issue. Now we have open socialists like AOC in Congress. Imagine if in the 1960s the Democrats had run a candidate who was openly socialistic. It would have been horrible. Back in the Cold War, the United States had a reasonable and well-intentioned fear of anything related to the very failed economic policy of socialism. And that is where we see this issue come back in with relations to socialistic, not fully socialist, but on the way to becoming like socialist thinking. And that is the devaluing of individualism and the importance of each individual paying back what they owe regardless of what else happens to them. This issue is an attempt to teach to an entire generation that the government can bail them out, that even if they've taken on loans that they chose to take out when they chose to go to a university that was however expensive as they chose to go to, even when there do exist some alternatives such as trade school or other educational opportunities, if you don't think that you're going to be able to pay off the costs of it naturally, that this entire generation is going to be taught, if this plan would be enacted, that just like they have a plan to bail out student loan debt now, in the future, that they could also be bailed out. Many also see a similarity to this and disagree with the decisions in the early 2010s in the aftermath of the 2008 recession by Barack Obama to bail out multiple large companies that related to United States industries. Some might say that these bailouts were indeed necessary of these large corporations to help people keeping their jobs, but many others saw it very unfair that these large institutions and industries, such as the auto industry or the banking industry, received such large bailouts when some would say that they were indeed partially responsible for the crash. I believe that you can indeed make a comparison to what is happening now, where these students, these individuals, are responsible for their own debt. They did choose to take out those own loans and did choose to sign at that age to take on that debt with the full understanding that they would have to be paying that back over time, and are now simply demanding that that debt should be canceled, written off, forgotten about, and that they should not have to deal with that, even though they have previously legally signed that it is their responsibility. And some might say that, oh, well, is it really that bad? After all, Biden claims that it could help increase desirable economic activity because then these kids would not have any debt and they could spend more money for the GDP. However, I believe that this is also a very unfair way of thinking, and I do believe that one needs to understand and accept the reality of this situation, which is that, yes, in many cases, high student loan debt owned by an individual does put some economic strain on them, and that they are usually not as able to pay for other things or afford other things as people who have already paid off their loan debt is. However, I'm going to take a somewhat controversial belief here. I'm going to state a somewhat controversial belief here when I personally state that I believe the fact that people who have large amounts of student loan debt still owed to them are at an economic disadvantage and have trouble paying for other things is, in my opinion, fair and deserved. Not necessarily because I think that the natural sort of punishment to those who accumulate large debt is truly fair, but because I believe that there is a good level of fairness to the people who have already managed to pay off their student loan debt themselves. This is a common thing that is brought up when the student loan debt discussion comes along, is to say so many people still owe or owe small amounts of student loan debt, yet have already been working so hard to pay it all off. Many people who have completely paid off their student loan debt or chose to take a more responsible path to college or to save up more money in order to repay their student loans, it is unfair to those people who have worked so hard to make sure that they pay off their student loans and get those done, that people who have not been as responsible, people who have not been paying as much, people who have not fully achieved that and got rid of their debt are suddenly just going to be forgiven of it. It is truly not fair. And I do believe that there is a good thing in our economy that if you have no debt, if you have no student loan debt, or you paid it all off already, you economically perform better, while people who are accumulating this student loan debt and have not yet repaid it, which basically at that point, in my opinion, is, if you look at the statistics of how much money is owed, is millions of dollars that are almost in a way stolen from the institutions that have granted these loans, with these people just never paying them back, that those people are at a disadvantage compared to people who have worked hard to pay off their student loans. That truly, to me, is the issue that is at hand here, is that people who have done all of these things, people who have already paid off their student loans, it is unfair for them to suddenly be placed on the same playing ground, on the same level ground economically, with regards to whether they're able to save up and have more money themselves, whether they can pay their rent, to be placed on the same ground with people who did not work nearly as hard and people who were responsible for taking large amounts of money away from loan-giving institutions and having never actually paid them back, only being bailed out by their government. But there's one thing that many people have not talked about that I believe is extremely responsible that is extremely important when discussing this issue. Believe it or not, there are actually already forms of student loan forgiveness programs in the United States. Believe it or not, there is a limited program called the PSLF, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which is run by the government, which enables specifically that people who work for the government for at least 10 years and have student loans can get their student loans paid off. Already, the Congressional Budget Office projected that over the next 10 years, the same amount of time that it takes for government employees to have to work for the government before they can get student loans forgiven would cost $24 billion. That is a very large cost, much larger than even the large spending bills that Biden is constantly pushing through office. Just through a limited program where the only people that are even getting student loan forgiveness are people who have been government employees for more than 10 years, expanding this to a much larger chunk or maybe even all of people's student loan debt is ridiculous. Not only would it be ridiculously expensive if the government is actually thinking of paying out their student loans, that is actually letting the loan institutions gain back their money rather than just forgiving it or discharging the loans. Not only would it be ridiculously expensive, but it would be ridiculously unfair, both to the morals and motivation of our next generation when they learn that in this world, the government can and will, if they're pressured enough by liberal values and liberal activists, if they are pressured enough to grant these policies and just forgive debt that is owed to people, to the extent that maybe in the future we'll even see people demand other types of loans be forgiven or paid off by the government instead of the value of working yourself to pay back your own loans. And also, it is ridiculously unfair to those who have worked hard to make sure that they pay off their student debt or are working towards paying it off or have a much lower amount because they were much more responsible, or those who chose a much more responsible path when they knew that they would not be able to pay for an expensive college education, such as going to trade school. Many trade jobs are very high paying, as we know, compared to students who took on a large amount of student loan debt, did not repay it, and have not made good progress towards repaying it or getting it down to a lower number, as we see by the millions of dollars that are owed in total student debt. It would not be fair at all to, as I said before, put those two people on a level playing ground. Democrats are always talking about economic inequality, but I believe that if people are giving unequal effort and unequal accomplishments regarding what they do economically and what they do with their money, then I believe that that inequality is indeed justified. If someone who has paid off his student loans or took a more responsible path to where they did not incur large amounts of debt and do not owe large amounts of money to people, performs better economically and has more access to economic opportunity than someone who still owes millions of thousands of dollars in debt to other people and has not, at their own choice of taking on this irresponsibly large amount of money and has not paid it back. I do believe that that is a form of justified inequality, that that person who has worked much harder and taken a much more responsible path of saving should be performing better. And they should be performing better to reward and show the next generation of Americans and to show all Americans that indeed, if you budget yourself better, if you save up money better, if you don't incur large debts that you never repay, you will perform better, and you should be performing better as a reward for being more responsible or being better at paying back that loan quicker. It is dangerous and unfair to the values of this next generation to promote this idea that the government can simply bail out things that you legally tacked on and you legally are responsible for paying. Additionally, I think that finally, I would like to state that I always like to bring in the idea of the Leviathan Society proposed by Thomas Hobbes to every single podcast. And I believe here you can clearly see that in the case of the Leviathan Society, where some people give up their rights to the benefit of others, We cannot have the majority of American society, that is the majority of taxpayers, the majority of people who try to be financially responsible, see their money, their taxpayer money, go into a program akin to something like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which already exists and is already projected to take up $24 billion of the federal budget, an insanely large amount of money. See that money taken away for people who owe large amounts of student debt are not the wealthiest people, are already paying the least amount of taxes due to how income tax works with the tax rates, already paying the least amount of taxes and contributing the least to this federal budget, into this giant new program to simply forgive the student loan that these own people have chosen to tack on and are responsible for getting rid of. Nobody should be responsible for paying off the debt of someone else that they chose to take on, not that person. Even if some would say that, well, it hurts these people a lot, I do believe that that is a form of justified inequality under the Leviathan system, that the citizens who choose to be more responsible in our society or have worked harder towards repaying those student loans deserve to be performing economically better than those who still have not found a way to get what they owe repaid. For that reason, I believe that we should not enact this student loan debt forgiveness program, and that we should also take a closer look at these kinds of programs that already exist, such as the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, where government employees are getting their student loans paid off for after just 10 years of government employment. Some might say that that's more justified, but I don't believe that it is. Even if they do give a service to the government paying off other debts that they owe to other banks, especially when this program is costing billions of dollars, is simply unsustainable and not fair. So with that, I'd like to catch off with this episode of A New Leviathan Society by simply stating that the New Leviathan must ensure that those who owe their debts repay their debts, and for the fairness of those who are the most responsible and who did not choose to take on those debts, that they can have their right to economically succeed protected without seeing their too much taxpayer money taken away from them to fund large programs like this, or by seeing the playing field leveled see the playing field between people who have large amounts of student debt and the playing field between people who don't leveled when one has been playing much better than the other. Thank you very much.